Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Our second hour is something we'd like to spend a little more time on today. We're going to be talking about comms. So if you have questions about comms, how to build them, what are they, all those things, go ahead and throw those into Makana. All right, now we're going to go ahead and jump into the questions. What do we have, Mitch?
Thanks, Alex. First one in from James Hutchinson in Dublin, Ireland. Thinking of moving from Nikon to Sony, which will mean changing to E-mount lenses. Can Blackmagic cameras use E-mount lenses? If so, how do they compare to others?
Go ahead, Bill.
Most times, the Blackmagic cameras are natively lens ringed for EF lenses, which is the Canon standard. Now, you can get Sony L to EF adapters if that's the configuration you have. There are other mounts for the Blackmagic cameras, but if that's where you're going, Sony themselves has a bunch that they recommend, and I pulled up this graphic. This is from Sony Alpha Lab, and it's not a Sony website, but it shows you some of the things. And one of the things I wanted to notice on the bottom left lens there, you'll see all those little golden pins. It's pretty important if you want full function out of any kind of lens adapter like that. You want to get something that takes all the signals that are coming from the camera to the lens so that it can read aperture and focal length and all the rest of the things you might set on the lens and get that data back. So there's variable success that I have had using these kind of active adapters, but some of them are as good as you can get. It may not pass all the signals, but it'll pass most of them. And if you can go in that direction, it's the best thing. But I think you're going to have to do a double adapt because I don't think you can go to anything other than Sony L glass or their mount. And I don't think there's a direct Sony adapter for it other than these kind of aftermarket products.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
Like Metabones, some of these adapters will transfer the data. Which is really cool about Sony lenses is that they talk to the cameras, specifically Sony cameras. So you can get all kinds of data when you go out and do a shoot. It could be lens specifics, like if you have an aberration in a lens, the lens will actually tell the camera, this is going to be a problem over here, so avoid that. Also, things like stabilization, camera position, things like that. And it used to be that you used to have this, use the application Sony Catalyst and then export in order to get that juicy meta data. But now they've made a plugin which will now work natively in Premiere.
Yeah, and you will find a degraded experience if you try to use, I mean, you might find some way to double adapt these lenses to the Blackmagic, but you should probably consider them, if you move to a Sony lens system, you should probably not consider your Blackmagic camera compatible with it. It's just going to cause you lots of pain and hardship. Next question.
Yeah, Don Eisenberg from Dharmansia, India. Can we use the Belkin?
Dharmasala.
Dharmasala, thank you so much. Can we use the Belkin USB-C to Ethernet Plus charge adapter to both power M2 MacBook Pro 13-inch and send 16 channels of Dante? Other ports used for USB 3.1 audio output, processing audio for 4 hours with CPU above 40%. Worried M2 Mac Air will slow down.
Go ahead, John.
I have not used that adapter specifically, but I've used other USB-C, essentially docks to pass through audio and video using Dante. The biggest thing for a laptop is making sure that you have proper cooling in place so it can run consistently. The only thing that's going to slow it down is if your power brick's going to overheat, your laptop's actually overheating. Making sure you have good ventilation is going to be key for that to be successful.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, the key point there is what John just said. I mean, this is a MacBook Air, because remember, so that's passive cooling. There is no fan. So
this is MacBook Pro.
Does it say? It says Mac
Pro
Air.
13.
No, it's worried M2 Mac Air will slow down.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a little confusing because there's a MacBook Pro 13. So I think he's moving to the Mac Pro 13 because the Mac Air may slow down.
Oh, okay. Well, then the MacBook will have a fan, but the Mac Air definitely is going to, passive cooling is going to get in its way.
Yeah, so it depends on how hard the processor is running. So you could definitely, I believe that is a 40 watt or a 60, I can't remember whether it's a 40 watt or a 60 watt adapter. And so if it's a 40 watt adapter, it may have trouble keeping up if you're running the CPU really, really high. At 60 watts, it should be able to hold its own as far as running something out there. But otherwise, that's the real problem is making sure that you have enough wattage. A lot of times, a lot of us are using the NGANs to these are providing 100 watts, and they'll take up the laptop will take up as much as it can use, and so those are the separate ones that we're using there. I imagine if you're using this adapter, you're utilizing all the other ports. And so the reason that you're trying to get it through that adapter is to make sure that works. Anchor also has, I think, another one that does power as well, and I think it might do a little bit more than the Belkin. And I'll try to find the link for you, but it should be okay. If it's 40 watts, it will not keep up with heavy processing over a long period of time. If it's 60 watts, it should. And I have to go back and look at that one a little bit closer to figure that out. Next question.
And Don Eisenberg is back from India. I've heard you talk about in-ear monitors that forms to the ear. What is the model? Does it work for a single ear? We have a bumblebee, but the sound seems thin and light, and our talent has some hearing issues. Looking for fuller sound and comfort.
Go ahead, John.
I switched to 64 audio about 5 years ago and haven't looked back. I've used the Ultimate ears. I've used some Sennheisers, some Sures that I've added custom molds to. But the 64 audio for me is the best experience I've had. They actually have a filter that goes in place that kind of removes that head voice sound that you get when wearing both ears. I don't use anything with single ears, but if you're going dual ear, I can't recommend the 64 audio stuff enough.
Go ahead, Bill.
And at the top of the heap, you actually can go to any audiologist and get an ear mold made. And the purpose of this, and like rock musicians on stage often do this, is that whatever drivers you choose, that industry has designed for people who need hearing aids that are absolutely the best sound isolation possible. So when you get an ear mold done, it is a poured molded thing that matches your ear. Nobody else's, just your ear. And so if a musician really needs maximum isolation and maximum sound, putting these in lets you control everything to the level you want without any additional bleed from the outside. So any audiologist, and ask them for ear molds, and they all know how to do it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Here's an in-between solution. If you happen to be using a foam ear, like you go to foam.com, Mickey recommended these. And when you squeeze them and stick them in your ear, they expand to fit the ear canal. So not quite as good as having a fitted molded piece, but in a pinch, these work great.
Yeah, and I have to admit, my only experience with those, and I'll have to look at the 64 audio, has been with Ultimate ears. And with a lot of these kits, you can either you can go to an audiologist. If you're in a place that doesn't have an audiologist, then you may want to look at, there's kits that you can get that will help you form those into their ears. I will say that, cost effective, those are going to cost, a lot, most of them. I don't know, John, how much are the 64 audio in ears?
They start as low as 300, I think. But they go well above 2,000, 3,000.
Yeah. So there's a wide range there. I will admit that, from a cost effectiveness perspective, as opposed to that, is the little SZ or Z10s, these little Linsoles that I use in my ears are relatively comfortable, and they have so much detail and sound that for when I first put them on, I couldn't do the show because I was hearing so much sound around me that I hadn't been hearing with the bumblebees, the bumblebees, in my ears. And so they do provide an enormous amount of much more data. Now they come in pairs, but you can always just tuck one away somewhere if you want to make that work. But I use them both, and so that may be that from a cost-effective perspective. Those are in the $50 range. Don't buy the Pro ones because they're not as comfortable. That might be something to look at. But from the higher ones, the Audio 64s, Ultimate ears, getting something that's molded to the ear could make it. All of those things will be. The bumblebees are really great because they are very, very low profile as our ear heroes, but they're really not built to completely block everything out and to give you the highest quality. They're really to be there for low profile. And so that would be something to think about. And I think that even though I'm going to guess that your talent, it may be hard to hide any kind of earpiece with your talent. I think that most people would understand if there was an earpiece in there. So I would take a look at those. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have the Shure 215s, and I got them because I wanted an entry level headset. And these aren't super expensive; they're like $100. But I find that when I get a perfect seal on them, everything sounds completely different, EQ wise and presence wise. I have to keep them just a tad loose so they have a little bit of air going around them, and it sort of emphasizes the voice. So sometimes it has a lot to do with just the fit will determine the quality of the sound you hear back.
I go, John.
When you're doing custom in-ears, especially for people who are talking, what you want to do for the audiologist is make sure you're doing a bite, so open mouth mold, because that will actually change how your ear seals. And so you want to make sure that you're doing a bite to make sure you're just having your mouth held open at a consistent amount, because it's going to be 5 to 10 minutes for the molds to set. You're going to want to make sure that you're not moving around and that every time you open your mouth, you're not popping the seal. It can be very uncomfortable.
Next question.
Next one in from Simon Ray in Shrewsbury, UK. Can you explain what it means to float a room, please?
Go ahead, Courtney.
It's when you live near the ocean and one of those, what you do is you build a room within a room. Is a floating recording studio, and the trick is to isolate the room within a room from any structural contact with the rest of the building. So you float. In other words, a lot of times they'll build a subfloor within, between the building subfloor and the studio subfloor with a sound absorbing device, either a mat type of like a jute map, something that will absorb vibration, or sometimes they even put them on springs or rubber, thick rubber chunks of rubber to absorb the sound. And then you make sure the rest of your that you have no hard mechanical connection to the rest of the building. That keeps any vibrations of people walking upstairs or in another room from coming in to the studio through the flooring or through the walls. And another important thing is to put your HVAC, your air conditioning should be attached via flexible hoses, and the air handler should not be attached to the room at all. Preferably it should be outside with the hoses connecting it to the inputs and outputs so that you don't bring in vibration from the air handler into the vibration isolated room.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Courtney's answer is very comprehensive and correct. And just to put it in perspective, when you build a room inside a room, you want no mechanical connection from one room to the other, the one inside. And the way you demonstrate that is if you were to pound your fist on the outside room, if there's any mechanical connection to the interior room, it turns that room into a transducer or a speaker, essentially, so that mechanical sound transfers directly into the inside room. If there's no connection, no speaker, no sound, and it works perfectly.
Go ahead, Bill.
And we talk a lot about the difference between soundproofing and sound treatment. This is the process to get you soundproofing so that, a loud hot rod going by outside does not get into your microphones inside. The room within a room concept can be built out. And in fact, I have done that twice. And it's a complicated process and it costs a good bit of money. Another thing that often costs a good bit of money, but you can sometimes get lucky, is to just get a vocal booth. There are commercial people who have vocal booths and put that inside a bedroom, which is the circumstance I'm in now for my voice booth. And so you get a room within a room. The only contact is the bottom. Technically, normally that's on carpet. And you get a tremendous reduction in potential outside sound that way. But that's the room within a room concept. Something inside of something else, so you get a double wall protection.
Go ahead, Peter.
And well, if you want to go to the full extreme, you could also remember to put a copper mesh around the inside build.
That way, no one will bother you with phone calls.
Well, and then you do fiber optic interlinks for the network so that there's no electrical conduction, and you use inductive based power transfer so that there's no actual hardwire running between the.
He said safe room, not a floating room.
No, he said he wanted a floater room. He didn't say he wanted a skiff.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a.
I said if you wanted to go to the next level,
Yeah, exactly.
I've built those.
Yeah, exactly.
Buy a carload of tinfoil first.
No, that is a design feature for some rooms so anyway, but you can everyone here can search for skiff and figure out what that is. So anyway, Yeah, and there's a floated room in our building, and it is just magnificent. We joke because I was trying to get a cable into it, and I was talking to Marty, and he's like, "Well, that room is not part of the building." He goes, "You don't understand. Like you're on the outside, and it's right below your server room, but it's not part of the building." So we're trying to figure out how to get something in there. We want to put some video cameras in there, but you'll see it soon. We're going to use it for Michael Krasny's show on Friday, so stay tuned for that. All right, next question.
Todd Perry from Prescott, Arizona. Does anyone have a solution for recording an NDI feed on the Mac that can be scrubbed back and forth during a recording to check a take? This would be for reference only, as an ATEM would be recording a full res feed.
On the Mac, because I don't think that NDI Monitor records. I think you can only see it there. Go ahead, Peter.
Memo Live will record an NDI feed. And I do that all the time. But I mean, it really is, you have to break it to scrub it back to look at it. I mean, I'm not sure. The use case seems a little odd to me, to be honest. No,
it's just to make sure that you're getting it. I think that it's just so that the recorders are running. The other one that I might look at, and I don't know if it does NDI, is mReplay. mReplay by Softron it's designed to do replays, and it's designed to play back while it's working. And I know that they're supporting NDI in other places, but right now, typically, they are, you're pulling content from, just try and take a look here. Yeah, you're pulling content from SDI signals, and so I'm not sure, I've never used it with NDI. So I'm not sure if that works or not. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and remember, NDI is a long GOP compressed signal, which is, if they're recording that, it's very hard to scrub that, especially backwards. You can jump back and play forward, but scrubbing is really hard with a long GOP unless you transcode it to an intraframe compressed signal. So that's why scrubbing NDI is pretty much off the, not.
Or you can record it. You can record NDI in something that
you can transcode it into an MOV file, for example.
Right, save it as Apple ProRes or whatever, and then it'll be written in a way that you can scrub it. Yeah. And Memo Live should be able to do that. Memo Live is the only one I could think of off the top of my head, although Ecamm may be able to do it. If Ecamm can record, Ecamm can see NDI. So that might be a less expensive one as well, but Memo Live will definitely do it. Next question.
Danny Law from Malaysia, and here on the panel. Can you extend the X32X USB expansion card connectivity via a CAT cable? Need to move the Reaper machine about 70 meters from the X32 rack.
Go ahead, John.
You can. There are some USB over Ethernet extensions. I have not had great luck with them moving any sort of real data beyond like keyboard or mouse, but I would definitely recommend maybe looking at a Dante card and just moving into that type of world is going to be much better for you. Provide whatever flexibility you need.
Yeah, and you can. Geffen makes an extender that should work just fine for what you're doing. It's a Geffen extender. It's not going through a network, so you need to use an Ethernet cable, but it'll go a couple 100 feet, without any trouble. And it's a USB, and then it goes to Ethernet, and then it uses the Ethernet to pass it. And we have used that successfully for a lot of other Ethernet communications. I haven't tried to send audio over that, but we have worked with it with a lot of other USB communication with no issues at all. By the way, just a real quick correction: Lenny Nelson, who would know, so posted in the event chat that he said that NDI is iframe, NDI HX is long GOP. So it depends on what type of NDI that you're doing. I just wanted to correct that real quickly. Thanks, Lenny, for watching. Next question.
Vic Sinise in Lowell, Indiana. I'm interviewing exhibitors at an upcoming trade show, and I want to use my iPhone. What suggestions do you have for a handheld mic that will interface with my phone?
Go ahead, Bill.
There are a couple of companies that make low-end products that work on Bluetooth. They're Bluetooth microphones. I don't really think any of them are really super high quality that I've run across. My solution has always been to use something like this. It's a little Saramonic mixer that takes XLR in, has limited but workable phantom power, and it ends on a lightning connector. So that plugs into any lightning connected iPhone, and you can use any XLR microphone, including wireless and handhelds, and so that's a possible solution.
Yeah, I've used the Saramonics for years, so I've had a lot of success with those, and so I would recommend them, and I would recommend not trying to find some mic that happens to work with these things, I would go for something that you can use a regular XLR mic and regular wireless to get there. This is the kind of place typically at an exhibition is not the place to use a Rodeco. Or anything that is 2.4, wireless. Those things are not going to be successful at your expo. You're going to have a lot of unhappiness. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I like that TC Electronics X2, I think it's called, that provides you with those XLR connections. And if you have a wired connection, it's not a wireless device, but always wired first if you can.
Well, and if you do wireless, you can always get then you just get a good wireless connection. You get, some kind of mic plug. So typically you can convert almost anything that you have with a mic plug. It's an XLR on one side with a transmitter. The one that I'm most familiar with are the Electrosonics make these, and they'll just pop into the end of your SM58 or whatever you want to use there. And they are very effective at what they do. And then you just have a receiver, then you plug that into the Ceramonic. That's what we've done a lot of, actually, is electrosonic to into those Ceramonics, into the phone when we decided we wanted to stream from a phone but use professional audio. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, would using a dehumidifier in equipment rooms help extend the life of said equipment?
Go ahead, John.
Potentially, depending on how moist the room is, but it could also destroy it. Lack of humidity is also a big problem. I remember we had a not well constructed data center in one of our plants that faced an outside wall. And I remember getting low humidity alarms coming from the server, because that will cause a lot of static potentially to move across the electronics, which will kill the equipment. So just keep that in mind, as you want your room around 40%. If you are above that, maybe try to understand what is causing that versus just removing the humidity from the room.
Go ahead, Peter.
That's because if you go back far enough, there were HVAC units actually pumped water into the air to make sure that you actually had that 40% that John was talking about. Because yes, you can destroy machines through static discharges.
Yeah, you'd be surprised at how much damage you can do with a static discharge. It doesn't take. One of my first jobs was wiring up mainframe computers, and you always put a wristband on and then ground yourself anytime you walked into it. Because remember, this is a computer that probably is far less powerful than the iPhone is today, but you'd walk into it. It had like basically a row, and you had all the stuff, and you were wiring stuff and putting the things together. And there was something that wasn't connected correctly, and one of the guys decided that he was just going to go in and fix it real quick. And I said, "Oh, I think you should." And I'm like the 18-year-old, I was like, "I think you should put a wristband on before you go in." He goes, "Oh, this is just one little thing." And as he held up his screwdriver to tighten it in, this little spark just jumped across from the screwdriver to the mainframe, and that was $250,000. Like, it was like done, and it just fried. It just created a chain reaction, and that was the last 5 minutes he worked there. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, that's tens of thousands of volts, not very high amperage, but you can really pull quite a high voltage.
For electronics, it's 10,000 volts is not what they were designed for. so that's the issue. Yeah. Next question.
I have a question, and it comes in as Apple's new crash detection algorithm is sending false reports due to roller coasters, basic clumsiness, and bad behavior on trampolines. Fixable?
And by the way, as we get through this, I wasn't paying attention to how many, but we're down to 2 questions for the first hour. We'll start the second hour early if we don't have any more questions. But it's a good opportunity for you to throw more in there if you feel like having us answer a couple more. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, if you're using your iPhone on a trampoline, you deserve to be taken to the hospital and have your head examined, because you should just leave it aside. But I thought, when I heard this story, I thought about the roller coaster issue, and I thought, well, there's an easy fix for that. Since it uses GPS to call the 911 anyway to report your location, it could just store all the longitude and latitudes of all the big theme park roller coasters in a little database, and when it gets a crash warning, it looks it up to see if your GPS coordinates with a roller coaster anywhere in the United States, and cancels the alarm if it shows that you're in within the vicinity of the roller coaster. Unless, of course, you crash your car into the roller coaster, then you're in trouble.
There we go. Go ahead, Bill.
been doing this kind of stuff for a while, which is do the research as much as you can. And I've read stories about them literally putting phones in all sorts of places in cars and crashing the cars just to see what would happen to all the accelerometers in various circumstances. So front seat, back seat, in a holder, in a pocket of a shirt. And they would gather all this data and try to figure out how to program something that literally through AI could determine whether it's a crash or not. They're still not 100%, but I will note that the very first week I got my new Apple Watch, I was playing with my dog in the living room, and I was down on my knees and I hit my hands going, "Come on, boy, go get it." And my wrist alarm went off and it went, "Did you suffer a fall?" And I went, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that." Then it said, "You have 15 seconds to say that you're okay, or we will call the ambulance." And I went, "Okay, that's fine." And I turned it off. But I thought to myself, okay, it failed here because I was playing with my dog. But that's balanced against the fact that if I had actually passed out or had an aneurysm or something and fallen, it might have saved my life. So these things are not perfect yet. They're working really hard to try to get them to be as close as possible. And I think in this particular case, what they're doing is they're trying to get it out in the field and get a ton of data back, analyze that data and try to figure out how to tune it. My watch has not gone off playing with the dog ever since, and I've played the same way a little bit. So I think it learned a little from that instance.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, two things. One is it is documented on the Apple support site. There is a way to turn off crash detection on your phone. There is actually a way to do that. The other point I would make along the lines of what Bill was talking about 2 years ago, some of you may or may not remember this, but I suffered an open fracture of my left ankle, which means you're bleeding out. And it was the iPhone, it was my Apple Watch that called 911 for me.
Wow.
Right.
And so it just did it automatically. And that was
because I didn't respond, and just like Bill said, he had 15 seconds to respond.
You weren't unconscious. You were just in writhing pain. That was
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's that as well. I definitely think that Apple is going to continue to improve the solution. They now have an enormous amount of data to work with to figure out all the things that aren't going to work. It's kind of an amazing amount of data that we're gathering, and you can see why Apple's so focused on privacy. They can't do any of these things without really working on privacy because they're gathering so much information as they move forward. But I do think that we'll probably see less and less of these. I will say that you should, if you're going to be using your iPhone, as was stated earlier, if you're going to be using your iPhone on a trampoline, you should just go to YouTube and search trampoline fails and think about whether you should have a trampoline. So anyway, as someone who has had not any kind of serious damage, but has done things on trampolines that were probably not safe, I would recommend not having one. Next question.
And it's from Douglas Carmichael. If we were to build the facilities to enable scalable conversations, who should house them? Could libraries be transformed into the communication hubs of the modern era beyond being pure physical spaces serving a specific need?
I think libraries actually could, I think there's a lot of opportunities for libraries to do a lot of different things in this area. One of them is producing, connectivity and the ability for people to connect to it. It's a central place. It's opened. They would have to do a lot of redesign. I think the challenge for libraries would just be a lot of the red tape, to do anything in a public building takes time. But we've seen the libraries do a lot of pretty interesting things here in Marin. The libraries are pretty good, and they've done a lot of innovative things as far as providing online books, is providing a lot of other services within the library. There's little classes and stuff like our kids. It's interesting. I didn't really grow up. I grew up in the country, so we didn't see libraries very often. And so, but my kids love hanging out at the library. They've definitely built things where that's a place after school that they like to just go, because there's enough computers and there's enough other things to do, and they can research. And so, I think that they've made some progress in that area as far as building these kind of communication hubs. I think that it's a huge opportunity. I think in general, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to build these as a service, because while people want to do these in their house or whatever, there's going to be a lot of companies and a lot of individuals that need to do a presentation, need to be part of a important meeting, have to be an interview or a demonstration or something else that isn't something that they don't have the $50,000 to spend on a great little system to look good and sound good for that moment. And, that they're not going to do it every day. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to build a new service for those types of people. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, as one of the panelists on Mac Break Weekly, Andy Anatko does come in occasionally from the Boston Public Library. So they have a great means for doing really good video and audio from the library itself. Now, I don't know if Andy, maybe Alex can tell us, brings his own setup in there or if he uses the library setup, but they are wired for it.
I think when they do the broadcast from there, I think it's from one of the radio stations brings all the gear in. I don't think the library's provided any of those things, but 10 years ago, we had a lot of trouble with libraries. Anytime someone said they want to do a Google Hangout from a library, we would always like, oh no, this is going to be horrible, because with any public organization, the biggest problem that we have is just their network. The networks are oftentimes not managed at the level that we need them to be. And there's just so many people using it. And so that, it's not, they don't have it's that they do have people and they're skilled. They still have enough people for the kind of use that it's going through. And so that's been the real challenge that we've had in those areas. But I think libraries could absolutely kind of focus their efforts on making things more interesting in that area. And I think that there's going to be a lot of things that could be done at libraries that would be useful. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, your comment about wiring libraries, we had it was about 2 years ago, and it's since been solved. Our local city was building a new public library, or a new library facility. As it turns out, it's a block from the central office that serves the city, the telco central office. We didn't have any problem getting fiber laid into the new building.
Yeah. I think that
once that was pointed out to the phone company that you might want to keep the town fathers happy.
Yeah, exactly. I think that I think in Freeport, where I grew up outside of Freeport, I think that the ISP, Salzgiver, I think is like right next to the library. So I imagine that the internet there is exceptional. Next question.
David Brady, New York, New York. I missed the response to my question on Sunday. Are there any good resources for noobs to start testing the waters of Zoom's API? Need to generate some reports beyond the CSV downloads available.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, if I remember, I think it was actually you, Alex, that said it on Sunday, but it was his particular employer is bound to be an enterprise customer of Zoom, considering the number of licenses they have. And I know I've reached out to my Zoom rep just as a pro license, and he's given me access to things, but it's access to things they provide. It's not stuff that I feel comfortable generally talking about even here.
Yeah, I assume that what you're trying to do there because there's different things you could do with the API, but I assume when you're talking about the API, you're looking at generating reports and building that data out. I mean, it is, I have not, we'll do some more research on that. I think what we said at the time was that we're not sure how to do any more than downloading those CSVs and then processing them. So what we've done in the past for some folks is we bring those CSVs in, and then we have our own scripts that are going to, you bring those into a spreadsheet, and then the spreadsheet does all the work for you as far as figuring out what actually happened. And so in a short term, that's what I would do, is just bring them into spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets have the calculations that you want to do, and you have to figure that out. That would be the first way that I would kind of play with it. As far as the APIs go, yeah, I don't know. We haven't really dealt with it that much. I will say that data display of, how to, displaying the data of how people are interacting with the events is a thing that Zoom could work on. They could make it a lot better than what it is now. It would give people a lot of information, and it really should be done at that level. Next question.
Next question in from Mike Beardmore in Reading, UK. How are your end-of-life CDs and DVDs best disposed of?
Mitchell?
Mike, if you want to come over and help me out, I've got some old promotional Ace of Base CDs that definitely need to be crushed. But
go ahead. Okay.
In the event that you want to do it the legit way, they actually have shredders for CDs and DVDs.
My shredder will actually go through CDs and DVDs. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out, is my shredder has a little slot for CDs and DVDs. So it has to be a fairly beefy shredder, one that does cross-cut, shredding, and it'll turn it into little chips that are very sharp edges on them that will cut the hands of anyone who tries to handle that afterwards.
Just make sure that you do it separately so that you're not putting in the rest of your trash. So as far as if they're actual CDs with music or movies or whatever, you can also throw them into, you can get little folders that have 4 per side that you can just keep them in if you want to. It takes a whole bunch of CDs and DVDs and reduces them down to almost nothing. You may want to go back to them at some point, but if you're actually trying to make sure that no one else can read them, then the shredders are more useful. Go ahead, Courtney.
Or if you've got an old microwave, just pop them in the microwave for about 2 minutes, and the static discharge will vaporize little traces onto the metallized part of the CD. I say not your major microwave, but an old used microwave that nobody's going to be using anymore. And that makes them unreadable.
Very messy.
When we were so I wish I'd kept some of them, but there was a time back in the day when we used to play this on the radio station that I worked at. We used to play this thing on Sunday nights called Rock Over London, and so it was like, "Hello, this is Graham Dean, and you're listening to Rock Over London," and then it would, and it'd play, and it would be the interviews with bands and talking about, all from the English, from all over England. They'd have these bands. All over the UK. They'd have the bands that they would be interviewing and playing their music and everything else, but it was a one shot. They literally send you the DVD. It has ads inserted into it. So that was their whole sell, was that we have a free show for you on Sunday nights or whenever you want to play it. We played it Sunday nights. We have a free show for a radio station. Here's an hour of free content. We have a couple ads that have been added to it. And then for the advertisers, we're distributing ads to all of the United States, and so they would, that'll be played out. And so it was a really great business model. I never forgot that. And we would have gaps that we'd throw our own ads into. So it's something for us to think about when we think about programming, is how to be part of that ecosystem. But the day after at first we saved them, but the day after it had a really cool Union Jack on it, and it was a cool thing. And so what we found that we could do is we had a little kitchen with a gas stove actually in the radio station. And we found that if you put some gloves on and you heated the CD up, it would get soft. And it took 2 shot glasses and you just jammed it between the 2 of them. It would form into the shape of a shot glass. You cut off the top and sand it off and then close the bottom. And you'd have these little shot glasses made out of Rock Over London CDs. And they were, people thought that they were fun. We didn't really drink out of them very often, but they were fun to have on. You keep little things in them on your desk. And we found that you could do that with LPs as well. But you had to use I think we were using the 32-ounce 7-Eleven cups. And you'd get the LPs soft, and then you shove them. This is what happens when you get 10 to 15 LPs a day. The ones you're not going to play, end up as vases. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I was just going to say the process in the broadcast industry of accepting programming in return for the spots is called barter, and barter is very popular.
That's great. Yeah, it was a great deal. Next question.
Next question in from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. The new iPhone 14 has satellite messaging built in. What are the use cases other than text?
Good, Bill.
I think the single word is research. They're playing in that space, and they're interested in literally that space. And so I think satellite messaging is their first play there. Eventually it makes sense to me. We were talking about AirTags the other day, and, they have a secure mesh network that is forming around phones. Eventually, in order to spread that around the world, if that is the direction they go, they will need links up into the areas of the country or the areas of the world where phones don't exist, and that means satellite right now. So I think it's a research play as much as it is a service right now. Eventually, just like what Elon Musk is doing with the satellite ring that he's put up there, people know that this is going to be a future communications necessity, and they're trying to figure it out early.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I don't think direct-to-satellite communications will go beyond the text level, at least for the time being, because the amount of power required to reach the satellite or for the satellite to hear the faint signal from a single telephone is such that the bandwidth just isn't there for anything above just a few characters per second. So text messages are probably what it's going to be limited to for the near future.
And the main use for it right now is that you end up with these situations where someone gets lost and they can't, or they get into snow, or they get themselves turned around, and being able to do an emergency beacon that says I am here, is what it's really designed for. I don't think it's going to be used for much more than that for any period of time, but it allows you to, there's lots of locations. Like if I drive up the coast here, I can get to places where I don't have any cell service. So then I can't figure, and it's not going to help me necessarily know where I am. But if I do things like I download maps, for areas that because the GPS knows where you are, it just doesn't know where that is. And so but being able to have a beacon that sends out your GPS location would be very useful and probably save. I'm sure we'll see in the next Apple keynote, we'll see someone who got lost in the middle of the Rockies or something and was able to tell people where they were, because a lot of times we just can't find them. So. Next question.
And the next question is for me. Is it possible that Zoom's latest client is treating audio differently? I'm noticing some strange or unexpected differences.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I can talk for a Mac client. Couple of things. One of them is that original sound on is defaulting to off. And if you turn it on, it doesn't make any difference what you do in any of the regular settings. It will always default off. And if you get moved into another room, as we do here when we're traversing the theater, it resets every time. So you've got to constantly do that. The change also says original sound for musicians, which is kind of a fun phrase because we're not musicians here, but we use the original sound. A couple of other things, just some weird stereo glitches that happen when you're muting and somebody's talking and somebody else talks over the other person. It starts bouncing left to right if you're in stereo mode. It's a very strange and very quick glitch. But these are small things, and I'm just curious, what differences are there with the new client?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what has changed there, but we'll have to keep on watching it because we have noticed a couple things with stereo bouncing back and forth if you're set to stereo, and the resetting drives me crazy. It's kind of like I feel like I guess right now it seems to be at a meeting level because you show in some areas it doesn't, and I think as a user you should just say I always want my original sound on, and the client just always overrides everything that comes through and just sets it to on. If I know that I have a system to do that, I think that it should be on all the time for me. And then other people can make a decision about what they want to do. Go ahead, Courtney.
This is only a guess, but maybe what's happening with the stereo bouncing back and forth is if you have noise cancellation involved at all, it may still be trying to do some minimal noise cancellation. And with the phase differences between the left and right channel, that's probably not going to work, and could cause the ping-pong effect that you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. Next question.
From Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Tony asks, is there a solve for management for multiple email accounts?
It depends on what you're using and what client you're using. My solve is I have Apple Mail. I don't really use anything special. There's a lot of different mail clients that different people like to use. I just use Apple Mail for that. And in that Apple Mail, I have all of my accounts. so there's a long list that goes down the side that is all the accounts that I use. And in those, and I just simply, the emails all come in as a single thing. I have to kind of pay attention to who I'm sending emails out as, but I probably have, 10 or 15 email accounts in there that are all just coming in as one shared list. And I can always turn ones off or filter ones out if I want to. I have some of them that are junk email that, so I use them for things I don't appreciate people asking my email for. And it comes in as regular mail as always. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, this has been a problem for me for years. I've used Outlook, which works pretty well because you can have your individual inboxes for each email account, so it keeps them separated, but you can have an unread email list that'll show you all the unread email from all the incoming accounts into one particular place, and so you can go through all your unread email every day and cover all the incoming email from each of your individual accounts. The problem is when you're sending replies, because usually most ISPs will limit you to avoid spam propagation. They will limit you to only sending out an email from the account at which you're registered on that ISP with. So if you have other accounts that are registered with other ISPs, it won't send that email out if that is your return address on a different ISP. It won't send it out from that ISP. So you have to look into that and make sure that if you're trying to send it out and it's replied from another account from another ISP, that may sit in your outbox and not go out because your ISP won't allow it to be sent from your particular location. So you got to watch out for that.
I just realized when you said that I haven't had an ISP-based email for 20 years. Like I just like it's not like it. I don't like Comcast or I think I had an Earthlink email back in the day. But yeah, mine are all like I have like I don't know how many Gmail accounts I can possibly. I have lots of Gmail accounts and a couple Exchange accounts and then my Mac account. Next question.
Elliot Robinson in Las Vegas, Nevada. Where can we find a list of panel recommendations? It's hard to capture recommendations during the show.
Go ahead, Bill.
They're not all listed, but there is in the Office Hours Discord an area called Chat Links. And if we specify something, you can go there and often you'll find a direct link to it. It's not 100%. And it relies on our volunteers to keep up, but that's probably the place I'd start.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, usually those of us in the panel that are listing stuff will try and post a link in the event chat to something that we're talking about if there's a link involved. And then someone, I think Sky used to do it, used to scrape those links at the end of every show and put them into the Discord for Office Hours chat links. So look there, and you'll have to go by show number, I think, or day and date.
Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana, asked, I'm waiting on a grant approval for the new Starlink dish and performance account. Has anyone had any hands-on experience on what the real-world difference is?
I think that this is the new, I think that their new high performance or higher performance. And I think that really the big, I don't have it, I have the smaller one. And I think that the big advantage is mostly bandwidth, like that it's I don't even think it still guarantees you the bandwidth, but I think that it gives you an upper limit that's faster. I think they had to start subdividing the audience now that a lot of people are subdividing the customers now that a lot of people have it. Everyone had really fast bandwidth when it started, but now they have to kind of have a general population of Starlink users and someone who's people who are paying for more. So I think that that's what's happening right now as far as making sure that some people who are using it for business or other things can pay more and make sure that they get the kind of bandwidth they need as opposed to basic connectivity. Next question.
Next one in from Douglas Carmichael. What hardware would you recommend for a small home server? I know about the Zima board, and here's a link for it, but any small server recommendations would be helpful.
I think it depends. It depends on what you're trying to serve. So is it something you're trying to serve into your own house, or is it something you're trying to use as an internet server? What protocols do you need to be running? I think those are all things that you probably have to look at before you'd figure out. I mean, servers can be very, very small and very inexpensive, or they need to be really expensive and really large, and it just depends on what you're trying to dish out. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Mac Rumors notes users on Reddit and Twitter have noticed that YouTube is asking some viewers to upgrade to premium to watch videos in 4K resolution. Has anyone run into this or has anyone heard of this?
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of things the last few weeks, and I imagine it's a for-profit service. YouTube isn't a charity, so I imagine they're looking at this as a revenue generator, and they're trying to do that. Some of the other services, Vimeo Pro and some things like that, have had 4K for a while. They're a little more expensive. And of course, YouTube famously, I think after Google, is the number 2 used search engine of all time. So they have this huge, massive crowd there. And I think they're mining it for profit, which is their purpose.
Go ahead, John.
At some point, you want Google to make sure it's making profit on the services you want, because they have a tendency to just turn them off when they don't. So, Linus Tech Tips talked about it this week about the paywall coming for YouTube Premium for 4K content. What they're really finding out is most people are only watching 1080p. Most people are only watching in a window. So they're going to save a ton of money of just removing that option when most people aren't using a viewport larger than 1080p.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly what's happening here. Is that the general use cases are people watching it on monitors that can actually see it, and for those who do, they'll probably they can move to premium. There's a lot of benefits to premium, by the way, which is I heard of this thing called ads on on YouTube. Sounded like a horrible thing. Go ahead, Courtney.
And there was a recent story where they're pulling a couple of apps off the App Store called OG, I think, which allowed you to play YouTube videos without the ads because it went around the YouTube ad server. So there were a couple of apps that you could do that with on Android and iOS, and those have been pulled. So they're going to start blocking those with more vigor.
Yeah, and I will say, I think people get upset about those kinds of things, but we have an incredible service that's online that is free. Like it's just and so for you to have maybe the best of it, it might cost a little bit of money, but I think it makes sense. I think it's hard to. The problem with 4K is that I think that the expense of delivering you an hour of 4K probably is more than the cost of than the ads. I think that's probably part of the challenge there. And so really subdividing that and making it work for YouTube is as John said, is useful. I was funny. My kids a couple days ago asked, "How did pi come about?" And I was like, I mean, I had some ideas, Archimedes, and all these other things, but I was like, why don't we just watch a video? And we searched on YouTube history of pi. There's like 10 videos, and all of them are really good. And I was just like, this is kind of an amazing time we live in, where we can do a search and get reasonably good videos of almost anything we can think of. It's just an amazing thing. So I think we want to also keep track of how great that service is right now for all of us. Now, next question.
Kyle Hammond from Chicago, Illinois. Any recommendations for hiding LED tape transformer plugs? Wanting to hide it in a windowsill.
Wanting to hide it in a LED tape. Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I think the only way you can really do that is extend the connection so you can manage it someplace else, because in the windowsill is nearly impossible to do that unless your sill is specifically manufactured to allow some type of connectivity in and out of it. But get it away from the object that it needs to be hidden from, and that's probably the best way.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about. There's a controller, if it's an RGBW, let's say LED strip, it'll have a little box with a controller that hooks onto the end with 4 wires or 5 wires onto your LED strip. And then that box will hook on, and that usually communicates via Wi-Fi. So it's got a Wi-Fi transceiver in it. And that will usually connect to 12 volts DC somewhere. So you could run the 12 volt DC, you could embed that box somewhere in the windowsill, but note if the windowsill is metal, you're going to limit the range of reception of that little Wi-Fi receiver in the little box itself. You could run the DC voltage then, up to 10 or 15 feet away, as long as you have a hefty 12 volt transformer that converts the line voltage to 12 volts DC and can send it over a length. But don't send it more than about 10 or 15 feet because the voltage drop may get you.
I only have one word for this, is Dremel. Dremel is your friend. Next question.
And it's from Elliot Robinson in Las Vegas, Nevada. Referring to the libraries as public libraries as a facility, does the Library of Congress have any of these facilities?
I think that they have other things. They have other fish to fry. Although I think that some of these facilities in D.C. have been definitely improving their connections. There's live streams coming out of the Smithsonian. I know the Air and Space has its own, events that are doing live streaming relatively often. So I think that they are thinking more and more of these locations as being streaming locations, but I don't think that they've rolled it out so that an average person can do that. Next question.
Steve Bodner in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Had my Blackmagic Cloud Pod connected to a Dropbox business account folder, and now I can't see it. Only personal folders. Anyone else get around this?
I don't know. I think you're on the outer edge. We'd love to have you tell us more about your experience with the Blackmagic Cloud Pod, other than it is now disconnected all your other things. So I can't. You can't. Yeah, here's what I would say. Is that if I was doing something with Dropbox and the Blackmagic Cloud Pod, I would definitely build my own account for it. I would definitely not use an existing account. I know it's too late to tell you this now, but I would build its own space because I don't know how that behavior is going to work. So anytime you're building something where you're tying a new system into something, and I understand why they did the Dropbox thing. Dropbox is a little quirky. It's probably not something that I have a Dropbox account, and the only reason I still have it is because I can't figure out how to get everything off of it. So, I pay. It's cost me a lot of money to do that, and I'm a little bitter. So, that's the. I think the Dropbox account in general, I build an entirely separate account to work with your Blackmagic Cloud Pod. I think that's the best way to approach that. And I don't know how to unwrap this now. So I hopefully you'll be able to tell us what you came up with there. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, do you think the 4K paywall YouTube is introducing is also influenced by most content creators only having equipment that won't pass 4K? Thinking A10 Mini.
Go ahead, John.
No, they're trying to make sure that people are paying if they're using 4K content. So if you're uploading a 1080p stream, this is not impacting them at all.
Yeah, and I also think that, we're streaming stuff with A10 minis and so on and so forth, but I think that one of the issues that YouTube may be running up against is that most content creators, especially the large ones, are all producing all of their content now in 4K. So before it was something that was 4K was kind of a unique thing to do on YouTube, and now it's everywhere. And everybody is constantly, all the major providers, so the folks that have the most views are by nature just throwing up 4K over, because that's kind of what the cool kids do. And that's probably it's probably impacting because their audience is then downloading those in hundreds of millions of downloads. It's probably pretty expensive to make that happen. Next question.
Douglas, and again, Bitwig, the DAW maker, heard the community backlash their paid add-on introduction and returned to yearly upgrade plans. In a challenging environment, how can software and hardware makers balance economic reality with the concerns of their user base?
I think that the community may have won the battle, but they probably lost the war. What Bitwig learned was can't develop new things. That's what the business side, is like. We can't add those things on and expect for any kind of reasonable return for individual things that only a handful of people might. So it's a horrible thing to do, to go to back. They should have never backed off, because they now they can't, and it hurts their entire community. And their community, I'm sure, had some opinion about that, but they weren't thinking about the big picture, that they've now basically poured water on the ability for the company to go down the path of really developing something specific. A good example of this is when Sound Devices came out with the noise noise assist. People are like, why didn't you just put it in the hardware? Well, it's because they spent millions of dollars making it work. And they need to get that return, and them getting that return means they get to do it again. And it becomes a good business model, and then you end up with more things, and what they're going to end up with is less things because of that. Go ahead, Courtney.
As far as a business model, you do have to maintain profitability, and the only other alternative to that, to appease users and yet still give them a lot of bang for the buck, is a lot of companies have gone to open source and gone to donation type, like Wikipedia model, which is, as you'll notice from the ads in your Wikipedia page recently, that doesn't always work either, even though it's used by millions and millions of people, and they're pleading for just a $1 donation or so on to keep it running. It can be very expensive, depending upon what type of software you're dealing with, to keep a business up and running and keep the programmers on staff to keep making updates without a pretty good cash flow. So they could open it up for donations.
Yeah, I think that the real problem is that Bitwig is a fairly niche piece of software, and their own community just made them more vulnerable to being run over or bought or anything else. It's what communities do, and especially when you start with something that's relatively inexpensive and folks are used to it being a certain way, and then they throw a tantrum about it. The thing that a lot of times people have to remember is that the people that are being highly vocal about it are often less than 1% of their market. So they respond to people on Reddit or whatever, but that's, it's a handful of people that are doing that. And they, that people get thin-skinned about it. You have to kind of make some of these decisions and just weather the storm. And they didn't weather it. And I think that it's going to put them in danger of not existing. And that will make their community wish they'd go ahead and let them make some more money on things that they need to develop, or they just have to develop the core and stay away from developing any of the new features that would keep them competitive with the other things that are in the market. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, Mac Rumors has alluded to M2 MacBook Pros and Mac Minis coming very soon. Do you think we'll see M2 Mac Studios this year, and would it be worth waiting before buying?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I really honestly think that there's not going to be an M2 Mac Studio, especially since there may be a Mac Pro, a new Mac Pro coming out. So I think that Apple's going to try to position that somewhere in the middle between an M1 or M2 Mini and the top-of-the-line Mac Pro. So I would say no.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I think people do try to hold off until new stuff comes out, but often, and I found myself doing the same thing, what you get by waiting actually isn't all that relevant to the way you work. And I say that because I'm still on a 2019 MacBook Pro to do this show. So I'm running 4 monitors. I'm running an iPad as a sidecar thing. I'm doing all sorts of things, and it's just completely fluid. And in all my video editing work on this same laptop, I'm able to do 4K video all day long without a problem. So the answer is, if I got a brand new Mac Studio or something like that, what would I be gaining? It would be a little bit faster, yes. And if on those very odd cases where I have to do 4K multi composites, it would take maybe a 10-minute render to a 5-minute render. Does that really make it worthwhile for me to rev? I rev on a certain, like every 3 years, I try to rev my computer systems just so they don't get too old. But
Right.
Is it doing the job you need it to do? And if it is, then waiting for the next one probably isn't very smart.
And now we're going to change subjects. Jumping into the second hour, we're going to start talking about comms. Now, comms are, what we're talking about here is how do teams stay in communication with each other, and and any questions that you have related to that. So we can be talking about some of the hardware, some of the software, as well as basic communication. How do we use them? We have one here. We're using Unity on the back end right now. And so all of us can be talked to. We don't use it very often as needed. But in a typical show, comms are, I will argue, 50% of your show at least. You could argue that it might be 70% of your show is how well you can communicate with your team. And so this is a really, and we have a panel discussion open. So if anyone wants to throw anything in from this group, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll talk a little bit and then we'll jump into the questions. But one of the things that is really thinking about, what's wired, what's wireless, what's remote. So, there's a couple different ways that we've done it. There's some big players, in the United States, and there's a lot of different comm systems. I mean, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was that, when I went to IBC, there were all these comm systems that were coming out of the Czech Republic, that were coming out of other places that were really, there's one out of the Czech Republic, and I just can't think of the name of it right now, it's all Dante. They figured out how to do it all in Dante. Studio Technologies also builds a Dante backend. And then you have the ones that are RTS in the United States, RTS, ClearComm, and Riedel are the big three, that we see the most there. So those are ones that we're thinking of bringing some of those folks in to talk about those things. So those are some of the folks that are coming together. And then of course Unity is the one that a lot of folks use when they don't have the money for those three. so that's the and Unity started off, I believe, as comms for House of Worship, and kind of just kept on growing. With each one of these, I mean, the ones that have been around the longest are RTS and ClearComm. I think ClearComm is the oldest of the bunch, and then RTS. The way we kind of look at it, and just to kind of what at least my background of where I see these, Riedel is kind of typically the high end. It's also the most expensive and the most quirky. It requires, like, if you set up a Riedel system, you really need someone that's going to manage just that Riedel system without any other things to worry about, because it just takes a lot to keep it going. But when it's running, it has it's wired system as well as it's wireless, which is a Bolero, and it's very effective. And it definitely handles it. What we see is that's kind of on the people want to have the high end or the best of the best. You end up with Riedels most of the time. The one that we see in events, what's interesting is RTS and ClearComm tend to break up. To RTS, when I see an RTS system, I usually think there's a truck involved somewhere, or someone who used to use a truck is where we see RTS systems. ClearComm, that person usually came out of events. So ClearComm seems to have really, they really came out of events. We don't see them in trucks very often. RTS, we see a lot in trucks, but not necessarily as much in events. And so those kind of have separated those out. I think that I think ClearComm probably, in my opinion, has the best solution for mobile. So their Agent IC is expensive. It's $250 per person to add it to your server, but it's really the best experience. And then again, I see Riedel pretty often. I don't see RTS very often anymore. In those things. But then ClearComm also, with a lot of these, have things like, basically the other thing to think about there is not just that it's not just what you have at the facility, but also how are you connecting facilities? So how are you trunking between two facilities? And so, and all of these systems have that ability, including Unity. So for instance, when we want to trunk between two locations with Unity, we use Unity Connect. And so we just did this in a show recently where we connected Unity Connect from our facility to theirs. And then we have our comms, but our comms are being piped back to them, and only a couple channels that we needed to tie back into a wireless system, which is typically what we use, is FreeSpeak for that. It's kind of, from a cost perspective and effectiveness, it's the one we use the most for wireless. And people will try to use things like Unity for the wireless in the building. The problem really comes down to latency as well as just stability, of that. So oftentimes you want dedicated wired connections to make those happen. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, one of my biggest investments that turned out to be the smartest one back when I was doing a lot of live events and things like that was buying a ClearComm system. I bought it used on the market. I bought 7 stations and the central thing and enough single muff and double muff of the professional headsets to run it off of, and all the XLR cables necessary. And almost immediately, everything I did got better. And I can't undersell the fact that clear communications during anything that's happening live makes the difference between professionalism and feeling like it's amateur hour. These have been developed over the course of many, many years to fit this task precisely. One of the things that you get used to the first time you have a serious comm system is that they are so sensitive and so acute that literally in a show where you can't speak out loud, you can whisper at the quietest whisper you can imagine, and everybody on that comm system completely understands everything you say.
Maybe.
Well, yeah. Unless they're trying to ignore you or something like that. But the point is that they're specialists. It's not using a set of walkie-talkies that may or may not connect and do the job right. So all the will this work goes away, and suddenly you can completely clearly communicate with all of your people, which means coordination, which means better results.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've had trouble with in the past, by the way, Telos is another one that we haven't had a lot of experience with, but Telos is coming out with their Infinity system that is all power over Ethernet, which could theoretically be a lot better for a lot of us to make that work, and we just haven't had time to do it. I do want to bring them on for a second hour, because I think it's something that I don't know as much about, but it's kind of a new system that has come out. Now, I will say, to Bill's point, for smaller systems, we actually use the Studio Technologies. So when we build like a little kit that's going to go into a room that's going to have 4 or 5 headsets and they're not wireless, or they don't need, or there's maybe a handful of wireless, we use a lot of the Studio Tech stuff because it's all Dante, and we can literally have another bus or a set of buses that are within the mixer that we have, and or a separate mixer dedicated to it. And it's very it's relatively inexpensive to do that. The problem really gets into is that you have to build all these mix minuses for it, or you use their little server. But getting above about 8 or 10 belt packs on the Studio Technologies gets a little uncomfortable pretty quickly. So if you're on a small team, it's to Bill's point, you can whisper and you'll hear every little bit. The problem you get into is that in the old analog systems, you'd end up, because these aren't balanced connections typically, and they are carrying power to the pack, you'd end up with a lot of ground loops. And so you got used to, in the early days of us listening to some kind of buzz all the time. Now, the one thing you knew that you were going to get in a comms was buzz. But with Dante, it's kind of an amazing thing. I know when I started doing this, we didn't really know. I mean, we started our early comms were, group, a bridge. We all just call, we'd all call into a GoToMeeting or something like that and talk into it. And that's where it begins. And then we moved to walkie-talkies, and even now when you look at like a concert being built, they live on walkie-talkies. So concerts and film mostly live on walkie-talkies. They don't have time to roll all that stuff out for each one of these things for just the general crew. And what's kind of amazing is watching folks building when they're building up a stage for a concert, the producers and the folks that are working on it, you'll see them look up and they know what channel they're on just by counting how many. They're using the different channels as party lines, or party lines are, these are the shared connections that all of us have. So you can have point to point, and then you have party lines, and party lines are just everybody's on that party line. And I thought that party lines was something that was created in comms until I was at my grandparents' house, and they still have the rotary phone that you turn, and it says, you are on party line 2. And you are 4 rings on party line 2. Anyway, it was just a funny, I suddenly realized party lines have been around for a long time. It's how our original telephone system worked to make all of those things happen. And so, these are all things that kind of come together. So if you have questions, that kind of gets us off the ground. But if you have questions about comms, go ahead and throw those into Makana. Let's go ahead to the first question.
And it's from Niels Braune from Karlsruhe, Germany. Do you have any practical ideas for low, no budget options for comms?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, there's a couple of choices you could go to. Low budget, you could go with something like FRS walkie-talkies, which are the family radio service here, and I think they're internationally available. They're a collection of different types of walkie-talkies from Midland and so on. They're about, around $100 a pair for these. But remember, these are radio communications or simplex. In other words, only one person can be talking at a time, and while that person's talking, they can't be interrupted by anyone else until they stop transmitting. Another possibility, and I haven't tried this, but some people say that you can use Skype on a local area network only. You have to have an internet connection to establish your account, but once you establish your account, if all of your other users logged into Skype for that audio chat or audio session, not an audio video session, once you're connected, you should be able to, all the traffic will go over the local area network. So you can set up a little Skype chat amongst a bunch of users on their phones, and use your phone as a party line into that Skype communication. That way you have full duplex. You could have a person, the director's calling the show continuously, but have it interruptible by somebody else. So that's a possibility to use Skype as well as a low or no budget. You'd have to have probably one Skype account to get more than 2 people on it.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of people who are using Zoom, like, for some of the stuff where they'll all jump on Zoom to make that work. Of course, it does still require an internet connection. So you do have to, there are ways to do Zoom and a local connection, but not usually. And so those are some things to think about there. If you're serving up, there's a lot of phones, again, walkie-talkies. A lot of times our kits go out with a series of walkie-talkies. So we have for Pixel Core, we used to have a set of 6 walkie-talkies usually that went into every system, so that before we had the comms up, we could still talk. People could wander around and be able to get back and forth and be somewhere that they're trying to figure things out. And we used a variety of Motorola as well as for the really long distance. We had a couple in there that are Baofangs that I don't think are legal. I don't think they use legal like
Too much power.
but they go for miles. Like like we could talk from the hotel, And so they were they were very effective. We usually had 2 of those just in case we needed to pull a ripcord and make it work. But so walkie-talkies are relatively inexpensive, but they will not be super reliable over time, especially if you're in a facility that has a lot of concrete and rebar. They're not going to get very far. So you just have to kind of think through that. The best budget option, I really do think is, from a budget perspective, is probably Unity. And you can buy those in small amounts. And so what you can do is you can have Unity in the cloud, but you can also put Unity on a local server. And that means that anybody on that local network can get a hold of it. And so you can tie. And the nice thing about Unity, I will say, is that you can have computers that can tie into it. So people can just open it up on their laptop and have comms. And they can also open it up on a mobile device. And so there's a lot of different ways to kind of get into that connectivity. And again, it's something you buy. You can buy 3 licenses or 5 licenses. I don't remember there's like a series of them, and you end up with 35 or 40 licenses. But you can buy them in small amounts to get just what you need. But a lot of small teams that are doing something with 6 or 8 people, Unity has been very effective at providing them a solid solution for not a ton of money, to make that actually work. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I was just going to note on the walkie-talkie things. I used to run a beer festival for charity, and we did this every year. And we had about 36 Motorola radios delivered to us. The things I loved about them, and I use them exactly the same way Alex is talking about. All the logistics for the festival over the course of the 3 days, that chat was all handled there. I would not use those for any kind of production thing because I don't think they're good for that, but they're perfect. And the range on the really good ones can be 3, 4, 5 miles. I've had sent somebody out for some consumable and was able to talk to them the whole way over that much distance. You can't generally do that with comm systems unless you're all electronically tiled in.
Yeah, and the remember that some of your camera systems as well. So if you're looking at some of the higher end Blackmagic systems have comms. I will say that I love Blackmagic. The comm system in the Constellation to the cameras has not been super successful for us. So especially to their fiber bags, there's been a lot of process there. So next question.
From Danny Law in Malaysia and here on the panel, what would be considered an absolute must-have for production comms?
Stability. I mean, stability and clarity are the things that are probably the most important. Generally, if we need to have 2 PLs is usually what we're looking for, and one's for production and one's for cameras. And those are the things that if we don't have anything else, if we're in some location where we can only get 2, production needs to talk amongst themselves, and we need to be able to talk to cameras, and we don't want both of those on the same line. Obviously, we build much more complex systems that have a lot more PLs or point-to-points, but those are the kind of when you're talking about the bare minimum, those are the 2 lines of communication that we like to have. Go ahead, Bill.
And the other thing is that most comm systems come with your choice of single muff or double muff headphones. If you're in any kind of a music venue or something like that where you got a loud band, the double muffs are pretty critical to being able to isolate yourself from the content so you can hear comms back and forth.
So many discussions about, you'd be surprised at how many discussions we end up having about headsets. So there's the folks that I'm a double muff person. I like them over both ears. I don't want to hear anything else. I just want to work on what I'm working on. And if I need to hear the show or I need to hear something else, I put my in-ears underneath the double muffs and I can hear both of them and it works fine. We have some people that will not put double muffs on. They have to have single muff, so they can hear one thing. They just get very uncomfortable when they can't hear both. Then you have the light headsets versus the heavy headsets. I like over the ear, heavy. I don't want to hear anything else. I just want to stay focused on what people are saying because I really think the comms are important. But you have people that will not. They will not do that, And so they and the folks that do production all the time tend to bring their own headsets. So they will bring their own headsets there, and a lot of times they're either 4-pin or 5-pin headsets. And so they'll bring adapters and they'll just have them, have their own headset, and then you just show them where they got to plug it in, and they'll plug it in. But it's pretty normal past that if they're really particular. Go ahead, Courtney.
One thing I like to see is a stereo or two-channel comms with a belt pack that can receive two channels, both the program audio and your comms channel. So a double muff headset would be required so you can listen to the program audio. And this is very important these days when we're going to these hybrid type meetings where somebody may be coming in remotely. You may not be able to hear them over any speakers or anything, so you need to be able to hear the program audio as well, especially if you're a teleprompter operator or a boom operator or a sound mixer. You got to be able to hear both.
Yeah, and a lot of systems don't give you that option. They don't give you a stereo input to be able to hear those things. Now, they generally allow you to tune the program, or you can tune it. Sometimes they just supply it. Like Unity, if you open it up, there's a dial that you can dial up and down how loud the program is in your headset, so you can make a decision. But a lot of them aren't necessarily going to give you stereo. I know some folks that, especially audio engineers, will tend to mix all around them so that they get a sense of like who is staff and who is client. And one thing you want to think about also is that you want to put your clients on the comms. Otherwise, they keep on talking to you outside of the comms. And so you want to put them on, but you have to think about how are you going to manage those PLs? How are you going to manage what the clients hear? Usually what we do is we do give them something that we're all sharing, but we also have another line that's just us. We need to talk about something because sometimes we need to deal with issues, and a client, if you don't know what we're talking about or don't know what that is, you may get very worried very quickly, in the sense that it's not really something to worry about. We may be upset about something, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be noticeable to the average viewer. It just means that we're trying to sort something out, and that panic or that push to get something handled right before a show can panic a client in a way that they don't need to be panicked, in that area. And sometimes you have to also give people notes that are not client, like if a client keeps on talking, like one thing that, you might put out over comms is the client's asking lots of individuals to do things rather than talking to the producer. Super dangerous, to have clients telling people other than the producer what they want. Because what happens is the producer's managing a whole bunch of things, and they don't know where everybody is now, and they don't know what everybody did, and they don't know where things are. And so they're flying a little blind if the client starts, and most operators will just do whatever the client asks them to do. And so a lot of times you end up in a kind of a leveraged situation. So over comms, you'll be like, hey, make sure to have the client talk to me. The client may read that as something that you're trying to control it, but it's just really trying to maintain, positive energy within the, where you're trying to get to, in that process. So you want to think about those things there. But yeah, I would say clarity and stability, not having a lot of buzz, having everyone be able to hear. Those are things that are very, very basic. 2 channels is the bare minimum. And again, a lot of us will get into many, many different party lines, that we start to build, especially for larger shows. You see these switches. When I first got into a truck, you'll see a 24 switch that's sitting in front of you, that's your comm box, and you have a headset, and you're like, wow, how would you ever use 24? And very quickly you get to a point where I really wish we had a 48 or 2 24s or something, because what you end up starting to do when you start to have those types of controllers, you start being able to add, you have point-to-points. So I want to talk to Bill, I just have a button to talk to Bill. Or if I want to talk to Courtney, I have a button to talk to Courtney. Or if I only want to talk to the talent, I have another button to do that. Or maybe multiple different ones for individual talent that I can talk to each one of them, and I have a button exposed for that. Or I have, PL for audio, PL for cameras, PL for lighting, PL for, there's all these PLs that are, and then a PL that they all might share. So these are all things that I might start building out all these party lines that are for different operations, so that I can keep those communications. So I'm not bothering everybody with all the communication. When you get into a show with 150 people, you can't hear everything, and you need to start subdividing all of those things so everyone's just talking into the channels that they need to talk into. And so those are the things, and you can decide what you want to listen to. This is where, by the way, where Unity doesn't really solve our problems as well as something like ClearComm. While Unity's a lot less expensive, it's stuck to six party lines per page that you can hear and talk to, and it's just, if you only use Unity, I'm sure you think it's fine. But if you come from something like Agent IC with ClearComm, it's really painful. It's just constantly like, because you're used to, we open up iPads and we have 24 keys that are individually assigned with as many party lines and as many point to points as we want, and we're not trying to find some other page and everything else. So Unity is a very cost-effective way to do it. It's for years we felt like they wouldn't have to make very many changes to make it a lot more effective, and they have all the other stuff working pretty well. Anyway, next question.
And it's from John Nichols in Concord, California. I'm in London running a 3-day global hybrid event inspired by office hours. Thank you. The production team is testing Riedel Comms. Any recommendation or experiences using Riedel for your comms?
They're great when they work. so they, I mean, it is, I think the Riedel is a very high-end solution. You need someone dedicated to the Riedel system. If you're building anything of any scale, you're going to need somebody that knows Riedel, that is paying attention to it, or you'll get to a point where things aren't working. That's been our experience. I mean, maybe you might have some smart folks that can figure it all out while they're doing other things, but Riedel is usually something that for large events that we've run into. I will admit that I bought my first clear comms 15 years ago as, and they were analog 2-channel, 70 something or other, 702s, I think, and just grew up into matrices and big things and, all kinds of other solutions. So given my own druthers, I would almost always use a ClearComm system for those things because I just understand it a lot and it's very flexible and I can integrate a lot of different things. The Riedel is a very powerful system and most of the high-end solutions use it. But again, what we almost always see is someone managing it. On the West Coast, there's one person. One person I swear I see everywhere. I don't even know his name. It's Chopper. We just know him as Chopper. And Chopper is the person, it's funny when I said that, someone probably will ping in, I know who he is. And he runs all the Riedel systems for like every event, every major event that I've worked on and, that uses Riedel. I see him floating around somewhere, and so you need someone like that that's going to really understand the system and tune it. Otherwise, you'll have trouble. Next question.
From Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What scale demands redundancy of a comms system? Smaller productions may bundle comms into the event audio infrastructure. What means are available to ensure that comms stay up even if program audio fails? What are examples of backup options for comm?
Go ahead, Bill.
Just me, but I've never bundled them together. For me, comms is always an entirely separate infrastructure that I'm pretty sure is going to work, even if somebody unplugs the house mixer, comms should still be up functioning because that's the only way you're going to get it fixed.
Yeah. Most of the time, our comms are running separately. I think we definitely have them integrated at places, and so we may have mixers that, in smaller events, we'll have the mixers, there'll be some buses that are dedicated to comms because it's just easier than trying to, and less expensive to do those things. But we definitely, most of the time, comms are a separate thing. And again, we have walkie-talkies as the backup as well, that we can kind of throw out to people if needed. One of the things that we have, for instance, if you're using a free speak system, just putting in a couple extra transponders and the free speak system runs on its own. Like it's not, everyone just gets a belt pack and you can get back to where you need to be. So those things. Now, what we do oftentimes is tie our Unity into free speak, and so that basically what we're doing is using Unity Connect. We're outputting that as a 4-wire output and or I/O and pushing that in. There's the inputs inside of the free speak system, so that we can put that communication into those party line channels. And usually we tie 1 or 2 channels from Unity into that, and we do the same thing. Well, obviously, it's easy to do when we're using a ClearComm system as well, like a matrix. So those are some of the things that we look at for that. But you do want to know, it's also why you have everybody's phone number. We've had ones where everything broke down, and we ended up building a shared phone bridge just to get through the show because something horrible happened. And so it's definitely not something you want to get into, but it is something that you have to be ready to do if worse comes to worse. Next question.
Danny Law from Malaysia. Danny asked, is it necessary to have the same number of party lines or groups based upon the various groups that you need to talk to?
Yeah, I think that you oftentimes have more party lines than you have the groups that you need to talk to because you'll have party lines for the groups that are there, and then you have overall party lines. So you may have one that's a general to everyone party line. You may have one that is just production but without but without some of the talent management you may have, and then you have one. So a lot of times you end up with more PLs, and you kind of keep growing to the number of PLs. You don't want to make it so siloed that everybody's talking to two other people. So that's the thing you have to be kind of careful of. Is it's easy to build too many comms, but generally you are going to have ones that are specific to audio and cameras and production and sometimes video engineering. Those are all different things that you may, and it also depends on how many people. If you only have one person in video engineering, you don't need a PL. You just talk to them. But you may want to do that only because you may get into a conversation with other producers or other, might be a group of you that jump on to talk about something that needs to be discussed, and that's easier to do with a party line. I will say that for a lot of our larger live shows, there's a lot of sessions discussing what for the basic smaller ones that only have 3 or 4 channels of party line, that gets thrown together as people go to get up there. But on a larger multi-day event with 75 people or 100 people, you're going to spend a lot of time meeting and talking about who's on comms and what channels there are and so on and so forth. Go ahead, Bill.
Also, depending on how cohesive your team and how long you've been working together, you can get by with open systems that don't have a lot of individual PLs and things like that. But people have to understand radio etiquette, that traditional Alex for Bill, go for Bill. With those kind of things, everybody is understanding, oh, this is Alex looking for me, and when I say go for Bill, it means that nobody else is answering, I am. These little tiny things you learn over the course of working with comms help make order out of chaos, even if you don't have all these specific things, but it's much easier and better if you have the individual party lines and things you need.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
And film production, where you're not doing a live presentation or something, or everybody's not necessarily in the same room all the time. You'll have walkie-talkies with different channels assigned to each department. Electric will have channel 6, camera will have channel 2, or production will have channel 2, and camera will have channel 4, etc. Sound will have a separate channel. So people know, the AD knows that if he wants to talk to the gaffer, he goes to channel 6 and talks to the gaffer, and that keeps all the point-to-point communications between each individual department separate and off the production channel, because the AD wants to talk to the talent or wants to talk to the director or wants to talk to every department head, wants to be on a single channel. But then all the conversations between the electricians that are running cable, let's say for the next shot or setting up another room, you don't want them talking while while the camera's rolling from another room and dirtying up the production channel. So usually you'll have separate channels for each department, and that way any departmental conversation can go on privately without interrupting or disturbing everyone else.
Yeah, and just to touch on some of the etiquette that was just touched on there, it is important. One of the things about people who don't do comms very often is they don't make sure that they have the attention of the person they're talking to, so they just start talking on comms. Now, if you're in the middle of a conversation, you're going on and off, it's probably okay. But generally, if I want to talk to Bill, I'm going to go Alex for Bill. And then I'm just going to wait until Bill responds, or I'll go Alex for Bill again, after about 30 seconds. And Bill knows that I'm calling for him, or if I know. And then if I don't hear from him the second time, I'm like, can someone get Bill back on headset?
Go for Bill.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that's usually the thing. Is Bill on headset, and why is he not responding? And so, but so I think that is,
that's when you
want to call that
camera
out.
3. What's Bill doing on camera 2?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the big thing is that in that conversation, the other thing is people start to run on. They start to try to figure out what they're doing. And now, if you're trying to figure out a problem, there may be a little bit of that. But wow, do not get on everyone's listening, and you're tying up everybody's time in other communications by running on. So I was thinking that maybe we would maybe take the camera and maybe we'll point it down a little bit. That's what people do when they start. When people don't do that, when I'll go Alex for Bill. And they go, you just go ahead, Bill. Alex for Bill.
Go for Bill.
Bill, I need you to tilt that camera down about 15 degrees. Thanks. And it's like, that's
copy
how
that.
fast, and you think about, and he says, copy that. And that tells, there is, some people will talk about Roger that versus copy that. Copy that is, I heard you. Roger that says, I'll do it. Like that's how we hear that. So they aren't interchangeable, but a lot of people use them as interchangeable. But those are some of the basic things that you want to do, but be quick. And also wait. If someone's in the middle of a conversation, unless you absolutely have to say something different, just wait until they finish what they were talking about. Unless there's an emergency, wait for that. And whatever you do, do not have a lot of social talk on the comms. It's like, just so you know, if you work on one of my teams, never do that. you can do a little bit of a funny something for a minute or a second or whatever on when we're really slow and nothing's happening. It's fine to say something, but as soon as we're in the show, as soon as the show's live, the only thing that should be said over comms is things that are related to the show. And, you want to be conscious that the client may be listening. You also just don't want to distract other people. One of the things that one of my pet peeves about camera operators in Las Vegas is that they have a tendency to talk about basketball, or sports. They just talk about sports the whole time. Like they'll sit there as camera operators because they work in the convention center all the time. They're bored with. They don't care about anything that's happening in front of them, and they're just kind of pointing their cameras and they sit there and talk about sports or worse over the comms for a long period of time, and it's really hard to get them out of that habit. So try not to get into that habit. Go ahead, Bill.
The other thing that I've run into occasionally, I just lost my train of thought. It was about, if you don't respond, because that sometimes can mean, bill for Alex. And if I don't hear anything, I'm going to bill for Alex. And I still don't hear anything. Well, some other camera operator may come in and go, he's got this problem. He just has a leg lock fail and he's struggling with his camera. He literally cannot respond right now. So you have to get into kind of the flow of what's going on. Sometimes that means something that you don't get an instant response, and you've got to let them fix their mission critical problem before they're going to come back to you. So,
and the other thing that we had to learn over time is that generally how you are over comms creates an energy around you. One of the things that we noticed very quickly, I've talked about this in the past, so I'll keep it quick, is we've done a bunch of events with NASA. And you would not know if things were good or bad talking to when you listen to comms on NASA. It's slow, it's enunciated, and it's calm. And I had a conversation with someone at NASA about that, and I said it's just amazing that you guys stay so calm when there are things going wrong. And we had a communication error one time with NASA, and there was just a problem that we were having. This is exactly what Bill's talking about. And we've got a bunch of actors and everything else. They're supposed to talk to the space station. And we're trying to tie this all together. And we had someone had pulled something out and we were trying to put it back in. And all you could hear over the comms while we were trying to talk back desperately was, Pixel Corps, this is NASA, this is Houston, come back. And it was just like, Pixel Corps, this is Houston for Pixel Corps, and it was like, they were very upset, by the way. There was a lot of meetings after that about why that happened. But that's how it came across the whole time. The thing that I was talking to them about, I was like, I was amazed that it was very stressful. And they said, wait, well, when people are hundreds of miles from the surface of the Earth, we don't find that being stressed will improve their performance. So it's not. It's like, I was like, it's a good point. So anyway, that's the. You just want to think about how to stay calm. It's very easy for clients, especially, but definitely for producers as well, to get angry over comms, and it does not improve people's performance. So you want to be as calm as we've definitely taken on. You'll hear me take on oftentimes a different one on comms, where I tend to be pretty slow. If I tighten up, it means something's really wrong. Like I'm tightening up to make sure that you're paying attention to. You need to turn something really quick, but it doesn't happen very often. And I'm not yelling. I'm just talking more sharply. Next question.
I'm just filing that away. James Haldane from Vancouver, Canada. Has anyone used Birddog devices for comms, and how well does it work?
Haven't used Birddog for comms. So I guess we'll have to move on. Yeah, we don't have any experience with that. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What headset or push-to-talk hardware are available to enhance the usability of comms? Are there any non-proprietary headsets and mics available that might span several solutions?
Go ahead, Bill.
I just have to weigh in here. So almost all comm system have these lovely little locking buttons. You can momentarily push it down, or you can lock it in. It's open all the time. The most typical problem is people locking that mic on and forgetting they've left it on and leaving it on all the time. It drives people crazy because you take off a headset and you put it down on a table and everybody on the whole comms line winces because it can be incredibly loud and destructive. So understand push to talk on all of them are usually this lock or unlock, and I just think it's polite to everybody to use it in push to talk mode unless you absolutely have to do something live.
Yeah, I try to stick in a state of push to talk. There are Bluetooth push to talk that work with Unity. I've seen those in the past. A lot of them, as Bill said, you can push down, like on ClearComm's Agent IC, you just push on the key and talk and let go. And whatever key or virtual key you have, you can do that momentarily, or you can double tap it and it'll stay open. To make that happen, you definitely want to try not to keep it open, to what Bill's saying, very often unless you have to. And the people who will leave it open oftentimes are the technical directors. So if you're calling the show, a lot of times they're going to leave their mics on. They can't think about that, and they're just constantly talking. And so you kind of hear that all rolling. But overall, you want to try to avoid that when you can, to make that a little bit clearer. But I always felt like there should have been a push to talk mechanically for our headsets that we have into our phones, and no one ever built one. I mean, it was like one of those things that I don't trust the Bluetooth ones that much. And so I always wanted one just to be on phone calls. If I'm on a car or I'm doing something else, I just want to push the button and know that I'm talking. When I let go, it really lets go, and just never found one that was really built for the phone. Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't used one, but I've seen people talk about gaming headsets that have a boom arm on them that automatically open and close the talk channel. When you swing the boom up, it turns it off the talk channel. When you swing the boom down, it opens the talk channel. So something like that might be useful if it could interface with Unity.
A lot of booms do that. So the Parrot 450 will definitely do that, as well as the open comms. So the Shocks open comms, if I roll those up, and that's what I use those for comms a lot. For when I'm using them with Unity. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, an exception to that, camera operators often have it on the actual camera kits. They call them that. They're the two little controls that allow you to do zoom and focus and the rest of that, because they can't take their hands off of them to push on a button. So often you'll find a remote comms trigger there. And there was something else I can't remember, but I'll remember it later.
Yeah, and then once you get into walkie-talkies, there's lots of solutions that have, you can get ones that will, a lot of times they have buttons and microphones. So a lot of times what you'll see is someone who has they'll have a belt pack or a walkie-talkie, and then they'll have a cable that comes up their back and goes over, and they usually clip it onto their shirt. And that's both a microphone and push to talk, which they can talk into, which is more convenient than picking up if they're talking ongoingly. Next question.
Well, Juan C. Robles in Mexico City, Mexico. Has anyone tried this open source comms server? It's called Mumble.
I have not tried it. I have talked to people who have tried it, and every one of them had some issue, and it was always something different, and it wasn't a great experience for them. so that's been the experience. That's the only thing I've heard, but I haven't had any personal experience with them yet. Next question.
Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. What visual indicators for comms have you used?
I don't know exactly what's meant by visual indicators. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I just know the old ClearComms had the yellow light that would flash if somebody's trying to page you.
Right. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, there's usually a call button light, which will light up something on the belt pack. And you could probably remote that to something on a camera or something where it'll light up a tally light somewhere. But usually there's a call light that'll light it up to get people's attention if they've taken their headsets off.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
Rob Collins from Kansas City, Missouri. For those who don't know, what comms radio etiquette should a new person know?
Well, we digged into that a little bit earlier. Sorry about that, but I think we answered a little bit of that process there. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the most important thing is that if you don't have something specific to what's being talked about, zip the lips.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
It's a party line.
Yeah.
Don't talk smack about the client or the product, because you never know when they'll be listening.
Yeah.
And it could ruin your career.
Yeah. Your career can end really quickly if you say the wrong things over comms, or you lose the client, or they lose the client, you lose the job. That type of thing. All those things are possible, and it is amazing sometimes how sharp folks can get. It's very easy to get lazy. So the other thing is that if it's your show, tightening that up early and quickly is important, because you don't want your crew, if they start doing it and no one says anything, you end up in a situation where they think it's okay, and you'll hear me come on a lot of times when people do it. Hey, let's tighten this up. That means that means stop talking about whatever you're talking about. So go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to mention, remember what I said, and that's most comms use an XLR form plug, but they are 4-pin or 5-pin almost exclusively. So one of the worst mistakes I ever made was taking an extension cable out and not realizing that it was a 3-pin audio cable and not a comms cable. And I was dead.
Yeah. So a couple things there is, always latch closed when you're not talking. So the things that people, when they first start, they leave the comms open. They're not succinct. They don't respond quickly when someone asks for them. Those are the big things that we see usually on early people using comms, is that they do one of those three things often. And so those are the things that you want to kind of keep track of. Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA asked, does the Unity Intercom service, terms of service, or any other vendor licensing permit sharing a license with a group? Any caveats to subscription or license agreements?
I don't know what the terms of service are. I do know that there are people that have entire businesses around providing Unity comms for other people. So, but usually it's not just like, oh, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to let you log in. It's building an entire. Part of the service is value add. I don't think that Unity has any problem with that. I mean, in general, people are renting comms all the time to make that actually happen. But I don't know exactly what the terms of service are for Unity specifically. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Alex, when you talk about a phone bridge, who offers that service?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's more of a device than anything else. As I know it, it's a device that sits on your intercom system that you can call into with a phone, and then it operates pretty much like a extension.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I think what Alex was talking about is kind of like a conference call. If you want to set up a conference call between several different phone numbers at the same time, where everybody is on a phone line, actually calling in through the POTS or through a cellular telephone network, you need to have a conferencing set up so someone can set up a conference call so that you're all on the same party line at the same time, more than just point-to-point communication.
Yeah, and those can be anything from GoToMeeting, WebEx, Zoom, free conference call, or Uber
Skype.
conference. The Uber conference is always like, welcome to, I can't remember whether it's Uber conference or free conference call or whatever, but there's always someone just goes, welcome to Uber conference. And we're just, don't use that one because it's pathetic. Anyway, it's just pathetic to have that. I don't want to have clients listen to that. So anyway, but yeah, it's just being able to call into a shared party line. It's still used in broadcast pretty often. They'll have all their comms, and then they'll add the party line so they can include everybody that's not on site. And I try to get rid of that almost immediately. I'm like, hey, can we just get you set up so that we can tie into ClearComm or to tie into Unity, or let's figure out how we get a couple of channels going on here rather than like for one client, we eliminated all of it. It took a little time to teach them all how to use Unity on their thing. But once we did that, now I'm on comms and there's a channel. And if I need to talk to them, I can talk to them, and I don't have to. And it was not that hard to get everybody on. And now there's lots of people on it, and they're very comfortable with that, so it works well. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA, asked, what camera lines connectivity options include comms integration? What are the pros and cons to using these built-in comms solutions? For example, cam operators.
Good, Bill.
Well, back in the day, the serious players used a system called Triax. It was a really big cable, and it carried video and audio and a couple of comms channels. And the big learning how to wrap Triax cable was its own thing. You usually couldn't do any kind of over and under, so you had to do a figure 8 inside, and they were incredibly heavy, particularly if you had like a 100-foot run. I think that's all getting kind of pushed aside now that we're moving into the world of video over IP that can take a bunch of things, but you'll still find them around.
I mean, every major event still uses Triax. I mean, like anything with every major event still Triax to do that, or SMPTE. cables, and those are going to carry your audio, video comms. A lot of the cameras have comms built into them. So if you're a broadcast camera, there's a fiber back. So if the camera doesn't have it when it ships, there's fiber backs for F55s, for Blackmagic camera, for the the Ursas and so on and so forth that you can throw on the back. That's going to give you that SMPTE connection and then have comms tied into that. Now, typically, what that's paired with is some kind of CCU, so a camera control unit. And so that CCU sits in the truck. And it is, what's nice about that is then you tie all those things in. So you tie the comms in, you tie the CCU in, or sorry, the comms, the video, audio, whatever else you need to the cameras, return video, that type of thing. And then that's going to carry it all over one single cable. So while they're heavy, and Bill is correct, they're heavy and bulky and a pain to use, they are also, they carry everything in one thing to the, one umbilical cord to the back of the camera, and it all works. And so for the cost effective, or not even cost effective, but just trouble, and most of them are pretty hardy. But cutting that means you cut the camera and everything else with it. But those are the things that are there. You can send those return signals, over Blackmagic. They'll come in, I think, on channels 15 and 16, I believe, on the return SDI. So if you're sending just regular SDI back to a camera, and some of those comms are getting, as Bill said, are getting more efficient, at least on the Blackmagic, with some of the new Ethernet solutions and so on and so forth, of being able to do that. So there are other ways that it's evolving, but the Triax is still, Triax or SMPTE cable is still pretty popular to get for major broadcasts. Next question.
From Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois, are comms for events sometimes recorded for after-event review?
We don't. We do it. I mean, we definitely record comms at times for that, and it's usually less for review and more for, most of the time we do it for training. So we can play it back and people can understand what what was actually happening there. We definitely have to tell everyone that they're doing that. Technically it's a legal requirement to let people know that they're being recorded in most states. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, in my days, the early quad, 2-inch quad videotape, we would always put comms on one of the secondary channels, or on the Q channel, which they had on that tape, so that we would have the comms preserved. If there was a problem coming up, we could have that preserved. But we did have to inform everybody that comms were being recorded on the videotape, and had to make sure that nobody accidentally put that Q channel out to the main broadcast. It would be death.
Well, and that's the thing you always worry about, is that if you put comms anywhere near actual production channels, you always worry that they're going to end up out there without you meaning to. And so those are the challenges there. I do think that it's incredible listening to comms during a show is so useful for people to hear. And we hope to do more productions where we can. We've done a couple of them inside of After Hours, and we hope to do more of those where you all can listen to what that sounds like, because I think it's a really, really powerful way to learn. Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA is here with 3 questions in one. Panel, what is your most annoying comms etiquette violations? How do you onboard new members into a comms system? And are there conflicting standards or nomenclature in comms speak because of colloquialisms?
So to get to the most annoying things is usually leaving your comms latched and talking too much in comms. I think those are the 2 big ones, is to leave them latched, talking slowly, not getting to the point, or talking about things that don't relate to the production. Those are probably the biggest things that I know I find. As far as onboarding new members for comms, I have a PDF. I think it might be floating around inside of Office Hours, but I have one for Own I Know that I send out. It's like a bunch of pictures on how to set up your Unity comms, and so it's very clear. I have another version of that for Agent IC as well. They're pretty much the same, but it shows you very click this button, and we find that the return rate is pretty high. And then the conflicting standards. The biggest thing we see in conflicting standards is how you say call out. So if I say Alex for Bill, some people will say Bill for Alex. They'll call out, and to many of us that's backwards. But there are people who will do it, and they say that's what they've been doing for the last 30 years, and it's a little frustrating. And then the only other one that we see a lot is copy versus Roger, which does mean something different. And copy sometimes can be a passive aggressive way of saying I'm not going to do it. So understanding who means what. When you ask someone to do something, sometimes you'll get someone that says copy that, and that means that They didn't say Roger that. They said copy that, and that means that they hear you. They're just not going to do it. And so anyway, so there can be subtleties in the comms that are communicated there in larger teams. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's my main annoyance is that it's the transition of the copy that into the 20-somethings vernacular. When you're just talking to someone and telling them something, copy that. You hear that comms talk now has worked its way into regular conversational vernacular. And that's what bothers me a lot. I said, we're not on the radio. Don't give me a copy that. And you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? That
I'm afraid
people are constantly saying that.
I'm afraid that it's so driven into my family. My kids say copy that. So anyway, Mitchell.
Yeah, it's hard to believe me saying this, but when I'm on comms, I'm a totally different person. I'm not Mr. Funny, Mr. Commentary. The things I hate the most are people that cracking jokes or inappropriate behavior. I don't think there's any time on a comm where you should tell a joke. We just don't know what the repercussions are going to be. The client could be listening. You may insult somebody, and now they're thinking about that and not how to do their job. So that bothers me. New members, I'd like to expose them to comms that passively sit in the background, listen to what's going on, understand what the process is, and they'll pick it up pretty quickly. As far as colloquialisms and standards, I think that's pretty common pretty much everywhere you go, although I do mix up copy and Roger sometimes. I apologize.
Go, Bill.
Well, I came up in a system where copy that always meant I copied it. I heard you clearly. So that's what I've tended to use it for over the years. But I have run into a lot of regionalisms. The other thing we don't talk about is I've run across, I had a director once, we were shooting a big thing and I was on the camera on stage and I had what I thought was a really nice framing. The piano player was playing and I made them really small and I put them in a corner. I thought this really is a pretty shot. It felt right to me. So I stayed there and I didn't hear anything. And then I saw the composite that the director went for because I had a return. You can punch a button and return. And he was using my shot as a composite for 3 other shots. And I thought, that's great. He finally used it. He should have said, camera 3, hold that. He should have given me some sort of feedback that he wanted, because I was about to leave it 2 or 3 times after 4 minutes go by with an unusual shot. Nobody communicates with you that they like it. You're going, well, it must mean nothing to them, and I just should try something else. So it's this dance. It's got to be good both ways.
Next question.
Next question from Chris Widener, Lafayette, Indiana. Has anyone used something like the Epson Moverio BT40 smart glasses to visualize your comms channel for Unity?
I haven't, but it sounds like a really fun idea. Usually I got so much going on in front of me, I don't know if I'd want to visualize it that way. But if you do that, Chris, let us know, because I'd be really interested to see what that's like to have kind of a heads up display of your comms while you're working. It's interesting. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, for a geographically distributed crew, how should people identify themselves on comms? Should it be location, function, or both?
Generally, it's just you. Like I don't know. We don't really worry too much about where that is. If it is something that you're having a more general conversation and it's important for us to know where you're at, then that makes sense. But usually we hopefully know who you are and what your location is. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I've heard it both ways. I often just get a bill. If there are not multiple bills, that can be an issue, so you may have to deal with that. But the other thing is, typically with cameras, I've heard most directors call it by camera. So it'll be camera 2, push in. Camera 1, do this. And they don't talk about who you are. They're just thinking about you in terms of shots. And that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting, though, is I see people start with that, and they'll go there. And it depends on who they have there. But I see a lot of TDs will put people's names into they'll put their names into the multi-view so they can call it out, and sometimes a little bit more personal and more clear to make sure that the people know who they're talking about. And if there's like 2 people, like 2 Johns or 2 whatever, they'll say, well, I'm going to call you this, or I'm going to call you that. And sometimes it's a little clearer than camera numbers, especially people don't have the same camera numbers all the time.
As a Bill, I get last name a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Next question.
From Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA, what should producers keep in mind concerning IFB feeds to talent? Who on the crew has this responsibility, and what principles guide this interaction? How do you train inexperienced talent to receive cues?
The biggest thing is don't talk to them while they're talking. Do not talk to the talent while they're talking. Also, minimize the number of people that can talk to the talent. It should be maybe one, like one or two people that can talk to talent, for most things. Now, sometimes you'll end up with a PL that there's a handful of people that might need to discuss something with the talent in breaks and so on and so forth. So you may end up with some more, but only have a group of people if they're all experienced. Do not allow inexperienced people to have open mics to them. If you do that, a lot of times for IFBs, we oftentimes will give, we don't depend on our comms. Oftentimes we'll have a clip that can talk to the talent if a producer needs to. We almost always have a wired SM58 going into the mixer that's supplying the IFB that is a switched, an SM58 with a switch. It's the only time we use the switch. We do not give the talent SM58s with switches because then they'll turn it off by accident. So but we want to be able to switch it on and off and be able to talk into their ear if something's going wrong, especially if you're doing wireless or something. Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry, Courtney.
Here's a brief story about me working as a teleprompter operator on the Super Bowl. And I was in the booth with the talent, and I won't mention any names here, but obviously the Super Bowl is a pretty big broadcast. And so since I'm sitting just a few feet away from the talent in the booth, he wanted to see his upcoming piece, because half the time the on-camera announcers don't know the stuff. The stuff's being written, while they're on the air. So he wanted to see the next piece, and we were in commercials. So he asked me to scroll down so he could read through the next piece coming up, and I hear the director shouting through the comms, "Gosh darn it!" Only he used more expletives. Mm-hmm. "Prompter, where are you going? Where are you going? We're back in 30 seconds. What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I got on the comms and said, "I'm sorry, name of the talent. Just wanted to read through the next piece. I can jump back." He didn't realize this was one of the early uses of the computer-based teleprompter. He didn't know I could hit a button and go right back to my bookmark.
Right.
Instantly. And so the director didn't realize that the IFB was open. And I said, when I told him that the talent was just asked me to scroll it, he was screaming, "Don't ever do that. He's not directing this show, that idiot." Right. He starts dissing the talent. And the talent very calmly said, "If you're going to criticize the talent, I suggest you not open your IFB."
Yeah, exactly. Go, Bill.
I've had both those kinds of things happen. And specifically in this one, my wife used to do local television, and it depends on how often you do this. One of the things she had to get used to is the director would constantly talk to her while she was on air. And because she was part of a regular broadcast, they kind of figured out who could handle that and not. And if you ever go back and watch the old movie Broadcast News, which is a fun movie anyway, there's a whole scene in there where the national correspondent, I think, Bill Pullman? No, that's not Bill Pullman. One of those guys is live on air, and his producer is just feeding him statistics, and he is in real time turning that around. So the people who are really used to doing that can handle this. But in a ad hoc show where people are coming together, talking to them while they're talking, Alex is exactly right. Big no-no.
And there's a big difference between people who are corporate and broadcast, because broadcasts have done it 1,000 times and corporate do it 4 times a year. And you just have to be kind of conscious of that as well. Mitchell, real quick.
Yeah, I love those stories. I'll tell one real quick. At a big awards ceremony for a large corporate client, the corporate client was on the intercom saying, and I was in a truck, and he said, "What's wrong with that audio guy? Is he brain dead?" And I'm like, I came on very calmly over the voice of God, and I said, "No, it's 3:00 in the morning. I think everybody wants to go home."
There you go. Next question.
Next question for Douglas Carmichael. I've heard of larger productions with a specific console and engineer for comms. What is the benefit to an actual console engineer versus a matrix system?
I don't know a lot of consoles other than the control panels for all of these comms. I mean, for a lot of shows, once the show gets more than 10 or 15 people, a lot of times we have someone dedicated to comms. Like it's just someone who's just making sure that everybody has what they need. Oftentimes it's an A2 that and when we rent, sometimes it comes with the comms. Like we rent the comms and we pick up an A2 that comes with it. So in a pretty typical environment, we may have an A2 that's managing wireless, an A2 that's managing comms, and then an A1 that's kind of managing all of that. And that's not an uncommon way for us to set it up. You just need someone that's paying attention to it. Comms are, especially when you're getting set up, they are a constant thing. And if they come down, you need someone who can pay attention. The problem with having your A1 managing all the comms is if something goes wrong, they can't do the show and fix the thing. So that's the that's the challenge there. All right, it's a fun conversation about comms. And so hopefully we're going to bring some of these comm companies on to talk. So stay tuned for that. This is kind of a good prep for us to kind of think through some of those things. But we'll bring a couple of them on to keep on answering your questions about that. It's a really important piece of production, so we'll keep on touching on that. All right. Well, thanks to the producers. We covered over 100,000 miles. We went 1K today, 100,329 miles, the Tlaloc Traversal, and 161,000 kilometers. And so it was a good day. Covered a lot of global miles, so that was fun. Thanks to the producers for all the questions and keeping the conversation rolling. And thanks to our panelists. Of course, we can't do this without you. Great conversation. Good seeing all of you here. And thanks to the incredible crew on the back end that makes all of this happen every single day. Small village, a global village that wakes up every morning and puts together this show. So thank you for your contribution. We appreciate you. And now we're going to jump into it. Is David back? Are we doing eCam? eCam. I missed the. I should have read the email there. So anyway, someone has comms. Anyway, so I think David Paskin's back to talk about eCam right after the. Oh, no eCam. See, like the power of comms. Someone just told me no eCam. So there's no eCam after this. We're just all just going to hang out in after hours. All right, here we go. Going to after hours. See, I finally got comms working, and we learned how to use them.
Surprised you heard a comms talking to you.
I know. I got it all working over the weekend. So I jumped in.
By the way, sorry for bobbling the broadcast newscast. It was William Hurt and Holly Hunter. Great scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
Teaches you a lot about comms.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if there's any good videos on YouTube about comms, like succinct. I really feel like I could build a whole channel just called succinct. And I just go to all the YouTube videos that are good and have lots of following, but just run on and run on and run on, and just make 2-minute versions of them. I think that's going to be my future.
Art Brooks was great in broadcast news too. He sweated a lot.
Yes, sweat on cue. That's hard to have.